All right, let's dive into a topic that's, let's say, universally relatable, right? The differences in how men and women communicate.
It really does feel like a tale as old as time, doesn't it?
It does. But we're going to try to steer clear of those overused cliches like, men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Right. We're lucky to have a source that digs deeper, explores the neurological and evolutionary reasons behind these communication gaps.
And get this, the source presents it as a man explaining these differences to a woman.
Like a guidebook written from the trenches of, well, just everyday coupledom.
Exactly. So our goal today, we're hoping to equip you with some insights from this source that might just make communicating with the opposite sex a little smoother, a little less, well, puzzling.
It's like decoding those moments when you think, what in the world are they trying to say?
Okay, so let's jump right in, starting with the brain. Our source says men mainly use their left brain for communication, which is all about logic and reasoning.
But women, on the other hand, they use both the left and the right brain, bringing in those emotions, the intuition.
So it's almost like men are approaching communication like, okay, here's a problem, let's find the solution, while women are trying to connect, share the experience.
It really explains a lot, doesn't it?
It does. Think about that classic example. A woman asks, which shoes look better? A man might just see that as a straightforward question. Needs a straightforward answer.
Right, but for a woman, it's often about so much more than the shoes themselves.
Exactly. It's about wanting validation, maybe a bit of reassurance.
Exactly. It's about seeking that connection, the feeling of being understood.
Okay, guys, pro tip from the source. Next time you're in that shoe scenario, don't just point and say, those ones.
Right. Take a breath, engage, ask her why she likes one pair over the other.
Show her you care about her perspective, even if, you don't quite get the intricacies of shoe selection.
You're not trying to win a fashion debate. You're just showing you care about her thoughts, her feelings.
Exactly. And that, my friends, can make all the difference in communication. Okay, let's move on to another fascinating point from the source. Men's fear of failure.
It's often seen as just a personality quirk, but this source suggests it's actually deeply rooted in biology.
Like hardwired.
Exactly. And they connect this back to our hunter-gatherer past. Imagine back then if you failed at hunting.
Right, the stakes were high.
Exactly. It wasn't just a bruised ego. It was a matter of survival for you, your family, the whole tribe.
So, fast forward to today, and you see your partner get super defensive or even angry about what seems like a minor thing.
It might be a primal reaction kicking in, that fight or flight response.
So, ladies, next time your partner gets upset about, say, losing a game or forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning,
Try to remember he might be channeling his inner caveman.
right, a little understanding, a bit of reassurance can go a long way in those moments.
And guys, knowing this about yourselves can help you, manage those reactions.
It's not about suppressing your feelings. It's about recognizing where they're coming from.
Exactly. And that understanding can help you respond in a healthier, more constructive way.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how men and women handle stress. Our source points out that men tend to withdraw.
While women want to talk it out. Classic difference, right?
It is. And the source, again, connects this back to the brain. Women, using both sides of the brain, they often process their emotions verbally.
Talking helps them sort things out, find some relief.
But men, more left brain dominant, they retreat into problem-solving mode.
Go silent. Trying to think their way out of the situation.
And this is where the misunderstandings often happen. She wants to connect and share. He needs a bit of space to process.
Classic communication breakdown.
So the takeaway, men, if you need some time to think things through, just say it. Something like, hey, I need a moment to process this.
And women, as much as you want to encourage your partner to open up, sometimes the best support is giving them that space.
Let them come to you when they're ready to talk.
Exactly. Trying to force a conversation often just makes things worse.
Now, let's get to a topic that's always a bit tricky, even a bit controversial. How men and women experience love. The source claims that men approach love more logically.
While women are guided by emotion.
It's like men are looking at a checklist, okay, does she meet these criteria? But women, it's more about that overall feeling, the connection.
The source actually uses this example, which I know sounds a bit simplistic, but it illustrates the point. Men might fall for a woman based on a single attractive feature, while women are looking for that deeper connection.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, we've all heard stories of guys being smitten based on a smile or, a laugh.
Right. And it's not to say that's all there is to it, but I think it highlights this key difference in how men and women approach attraction.
So, guys, take note. Noticing her beautiful eyes is great, but it's not enough. You need to connect with her on a deeper level, get to know her personality, her dreams, her fears.
And ladies, remember that men express their feelings in different ways. That grand romantic gesture might not be his style, but it doesn't mean he doesn't care deeply.
Look for those smaller acts of love and support. Those often speak louder than words.
Exactly. It's about learning each other's love languages, understanding how the other person expresses themselves.
All right, let's tackle the big one, marriage. Now, our source takes a bit of a cheeky approach to this, suggests men view marriage through a cost-benefit lens.
Now, before anyone gets offended, it's important to remember the source is using humor to explore some complex dynamics.
So basically what they're suggesting is that men might subconsciously weigh the pros and cons, worry about things like financial burdens or, less freedom.
It's not to say that every man thinks this way, of course, but it does reflect a certain anxiety about commitment that some men experience.
Okay, ladies, so maybe skip that super expensive engagement ring. A lifetime supply of video games might be more persuasive. Just kidding. Or am I?
Jokes aside, the real takeaway here is that open and honest communication about expectations and fears is crucial for both partners.
No matter your stance on marriage, being on the same page is essential.
Absolutely. And that means having those sometimes difficult conversations about what you want, what you need from the relationship.
And speaking of expectations, our source also points out that men might not necessarily see marriage as this, upgrade in the relationship.
It's more like just another stage.
Alongside dating, being friends.
Exactly. And this difference in perception can lead to a lot of frustration if those expectations aren't clearly discussed.
So yet again, communication is key. We're sensing a theme here.
Absolutely. Whether it's about shoes, stress, or the meaning of marriage, talking openly and honestly lays the foundation for a healthy, happy relationship.
Couldn't agree more. Now, this source doesn't stop there. It delves into how men and women view relationships in general.
And this is where things get really interesting, because they suggest that men might see relationships more as a collection of benefits.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for us.
So, for a man, a wife might represent certain benefits like companionship, stability, but a girlfriend, or even just a friend, might fulfill other needs, other desires.
So it's not about, loving one person less, more about each relationship serving a different purpose.
Exactly. It's a bold concept, for sure. Definitely thought-provoking.
It is. And it might also explain why, as the source points out, men sometimes are more likely to stay in touch with exes or have multiple female friends.
It's a possibility. It ties back into the idea of men being driven by logic, seeking tangible benefits from their relationships. It's a bit cynical, yes, but it does offer some food for thought.
So ladies, if your guy is still texting his ex, it might not be as sinister as you think.
He might just be, unconsciously weighing the benefits of that connection.
And guys, try to be mindful of how this might make your partner feel. Communicate openly. Be respectful of her feelings.
Exactly. It goes back to that core principle. Clear, honest communication is essential for a healthy relationship.
Speaking of communication, let's talk about arguments. Because, as you might have guessed, our source points out a major difference here too. Women often bring up the past,
while men stick to the present issue.
It's that classic scenario.
Mhm.
She's referencing a fight from months ago.
And he's wondering, what does that have to do with, whose turn it is to do the dishes?
It's like women are time travelers, revisiting those past hurts, those old grievances.
But for men, each argument is a separate event, unrelated to anything that happened before.
So fascinating. And the source suggests this difference stems from how men and women process information. Men, focused on logic, see each argument as isolated. Women, drawing on emotions and intuition, they see everything as interconnected.
And that makes so much sense, right? For women, it's all part of a larger story, a tapestry of emotions and experiences.
But for men, it's like, okay, we dealt with that laundry fight last week. Why are we back in the spin cycle again?
Exactly. Now, the point here isn't to decide whose approach is right or wrong. It's about recognizing these different styles.
Because that understanding can make your arguments more productive.
Help you avoid those frustrating spirals.
So ladies, try to stay focused on the issue at hand. Resist bringing up ancient history.
And guys, try to see how, for her, everything is connected.
Acknowledging past hurts might actually be necessary to move forward.
Exactly. It's about meeting each other's needs, finding that common ground where you can both feel heard and understood.
Now, ready for a laugh? Our source offers a rather tongue-in-cheek tip for how to win an argument with a woman.
And it's surprisingly simple. Ready for it.
I am. Hit me with it.
Just apologize.
Wait, seriously, that's it. Just say I'm sorry.
They're being a bit cheeky, of course. But it does highlight this important point. Women often prioritize that emotional connection.
Over a purely logical resolution.
Exactly. A heartfelt apology, even if you don't fully agree with her viewpoint, can go a long way in diffusing the tension.
So it's not about, like, admitting defeat or conceding the argument.
Not necessarily. It's about validating her feelings, showing you care about her experience.
Okay, this is brilliant. Men resist that urge to argue your point to death. Sometimes a simple, I'm sorry you feel that way, can work wonders.
And women, remember that while an apology is great, it's also important to clearly communicate your needs and your perspective.
Don't be afraid to articulate what you're feeling, what you need from him.
Now, when it comes to men, our source suggests that winning an argument is all about logic and reason.
So it's like presenting a case in court. Lay out the facts, build your argument, and boom, case closed.
That's the general idea. The source argues that men respond to facts, to logic, rather than appeals to emotion or empathy.
This is so fascinating because it really highlights that fundamental difference in how we approach communication, even conflict. Men want that solution, that resolution. Women want to feel heard, understood.
Exactly. And recognizing that can be a game changer in how you approach disagreements.
You can tailor your communication style, avoid those misunderstandings.
And ultimately have more productive conversations where both people feel respected and validated.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, from brains to marriage to arguments, and it does seem like men and women really are speaking different languages.
Sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it?
It does. So what does our source ultimately conclude about these differences? Where do we land after all this?
Well, they end on a pretty provocative note, suggesting that women, with their more complex emotional and communicative abilities, might actually be the more evolved sex.
Whoa, hold on a second. That's a bold statement.
It is. But remember, this source uses humor throughout, so it's up to you how seriously you take that final claim.
It definitely gives us something to think about. Are women the superior species?
Well, let's not jump to conclusions.
Right, of course not. It is just one perspective.
Yeah.
And presented, as you said, with a good dose of humor.
Exactly. And the beauty of a deep dive like this is that it sparks curiosity, encourages us to delve deeper into these topics.
So while we've had some fun dissecting those gender stereotypes,
Yeah,
the real takeaway here is to be mindful of how you communicate with your partner.
absolutely. Because ultimately, understanding isn't about reinforcing stereotypes, it's about building bridges, improving communication.
And hopefully creating more fulfilling relationships along the way.
Exactly. And hey, maybe with a bit of effort and a good dose of laughter, we can all learn to navigate those Martian and Venusian landscapes a little bit better.
Well said. Okay, now the source also explores how those ancient hunter-gatherer instincts might still be influencing men's behavior today.
Even though we're not, out hunting woolly mammoths anymore.
Right. So are you suggesting that men are still hardwired to be the providers, the protectors, even in a modern world where those roles are not as clearly defined?
That's the idea the source is playing with, and I think it's a fascinating one, don't you?
It is. So if a guy struggles with, say, expressing vulnerability, asking for help,
It might be because of this ingrained pressure to be strong, self-sufficient.
even when it's not necessary or, frankly, healthy.
Exactly, and that can lead to a lot of internal conflict for men.
So guys, permission granted from your friendly neighborhood deep dive. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to show your emotions.
It doesn't make you any less of a man.
In fact, it probably makes you a better partner, a better friend, a more well-rounded human being.
Couldn't agree more. And ladies, you can play a role in this too.
How so?
Try to create a space where your partner feels safe to be vulnerable. Encourage him to open up, share those feelings, even if it feels awkward at first.
It's about letting go of those rigid gender roles.
Exactly, allowing both men and women to express their full selves.
And on that note, the source leaves us with a question that's both humorous and thought-provoking. If women are indeed more evolved, why haven't they taken over the world yet?
It's a great question, isn't it? Maybe they're too busy deciphering men's mixed signals.
Or maybe they're patiently waiting for us to catch up.
Who knows, but that question really challenges our assumptions, doesn't it?
It does. Makes you think. And ultimately, that's what a good deep dive should do. Get us thinking, questioning, exploring new ideas.
Exactly. And in this case, it's a topic that impacts all of us, right? We all have relationships with men and women, whether romantic, family, professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So While we've had some fun today, I think the real takeaway is to be mindful of how you communicate, how you interact with the people in your life.
Recognize those moments when you might be speaking different languages and try to bridge those gaps with understanding, with empathy.
Well said. Because understanding these differences isn't about judging each other.
It's about building those bridges, improving communication, creating more fulfilling relationships.
And, as always, the best way to understand someone is to truly listen.
Listen with an open mind, an open heart.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And, building those bridges, it often starts with understanding, well, where those communication gaps come from. And our source, they dive into some really specific scenarios, like how men and women, we approach giving and receiving compliments differently.
Oh, compliments. Everyone loves a good compliment, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like men and women might have different, I don't know, maybe languages when it comes to this whole giving and receiving compliments thing.
It's true. The source points out that men tend to be much more direct, to the point with their compliments. It's like, you look nice, or, that was a great presentation. Simple, straightforward.
But women, they often prefer a bit more detail, a bit more context. It's not enough to just say, you look great. They want to know why you think they look great.
Right. What specifically caught your eye? Is it the dress, the hair, the way, their eyes are sparkling?
Exactly. And the source suggests this might be because of how men and women, we process information differently. Men are focused on conveying the message itself, but women, they're also seeking that deeper connection.
That validation of their feelings, their efforts.
So guys, if you really want your compliments to hit the mark, try adding a little something extra. Instead of just saying, that's a nice dress, tell her how the color complements her eyes, or how the style, accentuates her figure.
And ladies, try to appreciate the simplicity of a man's compliment. It might not be wrapped in flowery language, but it's often very genuine, heartfelt.
And sometimes, those compliments might not even be verbalized. It might be a lingering glance, a helping hand, a thoughtful gesture.
Absolutely. Pay attention to those nonverbal cues. They often speak volumes.
Okay, let's move on to another tricky area of communication. Asking for what you want. Because apparently, surprise, surprise, men and women have different approaches here too.
You got it. The source argues that men tend to be much more direct in this area. If they want something, they just, come out and ask for it. No beating around the bush.
But women, it seems, are more likely to use what's called indirect communication. So they might hint, they might suggest, or even just hope that their partner will, magically pick up on their needs without them having to spell it out.
And this goes back to, I think, that desire for connection, that understanding that we talked about earlier. Women often want their partners to just get them, anticipate their needs.
Like they're playing a game of emotional charades almost.
Exactly. But the problem with that approach is that men, well, they're not always the best at reading between the lines. They tend to take things very literally. So if you're not clear about what you want, chances are they're just not going to get it.
Oh, this is so true. I've heard countless stories from female friends about how their partners just don't get it.
So, ladies, a word of advice, be direct. If you want something, say it clearly, directly. Don't expect your partner to be a mind reader.
And guys, try to be a little more attuned to those, nonverbal cues. Even if she's not saying it outright, there might be those hints, those suggestions that you can pick up on.
And when in doubt, just ask, is there anything you need? What can I do to help? Those simple questions can go a long way.
Okay, so we've talked about romantic relationships, but our source also dives into the dynamics between men and women in the workplace.
Because those same communication differences, they often pop up in professional settings as well.
Oh, absolutely. We've all seen those meetings where the men are like, okay, let's get down to business, make a decision, while the women are trying to, build consensus, foster collaboration.
Exactly. The source argues that men, they often approach meetings with a very specific goal in mind, to make a decision, solve a problem, move forward.
But women, they often see meetings as an opportunity to, well, connect with colleagues, share ideas, build relationships.
So it's like men are playing chess while women are playing a more collaborative game.
I don't know, maybe charades again.
Maybe. The key takeaway, though, is that recognizing these different approaches can actually help create a more harmonious, productive work environment.
So men, be mindful of the importance of, building those relationships, fostering teamwork. And ladies, don't be afraid to assert yourself. Clearly state your goals, your expectations.
And remember, effective communication isn't about conforming to stereotypes. It's about understanding these nuances and using that knowledge to bridge the gaps, create more meaningful connections.
both in our personal and professional lives. Okay, now, ready to delve into a bit of a mystery. Because our source tackles a topic that's often shrouded in, well, misunderstanding. Men's emotional world.
Right. Because the source argues that men, they do have feelings, just like women do, but they often express them differently.
Wait, so you're telling me that those stoic silent types actually have this, like, rich inner world of emotions bubbling beneath the surface?
Exactly. But societal expectations, those ingrained hunter-gatherer instincts we talked about, it can make it really difficult for men to, express those feelings openly.
So instead of, like, grand declarations of love or, tearful breakdowns.
Men might express their emotions through actions, gestures, even jokes.
It's a different kind of language, isn't it?
It is. The source suggests that men often show their love and affection through acts of service, providing for their loved ones, protecting them, fixing things around the house.
It's their way of saying, I care,
Right.
without actually having to, put it into words.
Exactly. And sometimes those expressions of emotion, they might come out in less conventional ways, like through teasing, banter, a bit of, friendly competition.
So it's important for both men and women to, learn to recognize these different ways of expressing emotions
Because it can prevent a lot of misunderstandings.
and ultimately strengthen those connections. So, ladies, if your guy isn't the most verbally expressive, pay attention to his actions.
Those small acts of kindness, support, they often speak volumes.
And guys, don't be afraid to, let your guard down a little. Sharing your feelings, even if it feels awkward at first, it can really deepen your relationship.
Create a stronger sense of intimacy.
Speaking of intimacy, our source also dives into the often tricky topic of physical affection, because it seems like yet again men and women might have different expectations and desires when it comes to touch.
It's true. The source argues that men, they tend to be more physically oriented, driven by that, biological urge for touch, connection.
But women often view physical affection as a way of expressing emotional closeness, intimacy.
Exactly. So for men, a hug, a kiss, it might be a simple expression of physical desire.
But for women, it might represent a much deeper level of, emotional connection.
Right. And those different interpretations can sometimes lead to, well, miscommunication and frustration.
It's like they're speaking different love languages, one focused on the physical, the other on the emotional.
Exactly. And the key here, as with all aspects of communication, is to be mindful of those differences. Communicate openly, honestly about your needs and your desires.
So guys, try to understand that, physical affection, it isn't always just about sex. It can be a way for your partner to feel loved, cherished, connected to you.
And ladies, try to be understanding of your partner's physical needs, even if they don't always, align perfectly with yours.
Open communication, a willingness to compromise, those are key to creating a fulfilling and harmonious physical relationship.
Couldn't agree more.
It's pretty amazing how these subtle differences in communication, they can really have a big impact on our relationships.
It's true. Sometimes it feels like we're navigating this minefield of unspoken expectations, misinterpretations. But the good news is, once we start to recognize those patterns, we can communicate more effectively.
And that's where the real magic happens, right? When we move beyond those stereotypes, connect on a deeper level.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that even though we might express ourselves differently, we all have those same basic needs.
The need to be loved, to be understood, to feel connected.
Exactly.
And speaking of connection, our source has some really interesting insights into how men and women, we approach friendships differently.
Oh yeah, this is a good one. The source argues that men's friendships tend to be more activity-based. They bond over shared interests.
So like sports, video games, working on projects together.
Right. Think of those classic buddy movies, guys hanging out in the garage, going on a road trip. It's all about doing things together.
But women's friendships, the source suggests, they're more emotionally focused.
They value those deep conversations, sharing secrets, providing that emotional support. It's about really being there for each other.
It's like those scenes in romantic comedies where the women are all gathered around talking about their relationships, their dreams, their fears.
Exactly. And the source acknowledges that these are, generalizations.
Of course, of course.
But it is interesting to think about how these different approaches to friendship, how they might shape our social lives.
Right? And maybe even our overall sense of connection.
Absolutely.
So guys, if you want to deepen your friendships, maybe try opening up a little bit more. Share your feelings. Be there for your buddies on an emotional level.
And ladies, don't underestimate the value of shared activities, those experiences. Sometimes bonding over a game of tennis or a project at work, it can be just as meaningful as a deep conversation.
And I think ultimately, what the source is reminding us here is that healthy relationships,
Yeah.
whether they're romantic, platonic, familial,
They're all built on that foundation of respect, understanding, and a willingness to communicate.
openly and honestly, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's about being willing to see the world through each other's eyes, appreciate those differences, celebrate the unique ways that men and women we contribute to each other's lives, to the world around us.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of male and female communication, what's the one key takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest lesson here is that communication, it's a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process. We're constantly learning, growing, adapting to each other's styles, needs.
And the more we understand about those differences.
The more fulfilling, the more harmonious our relationships can be.
Absolutely. So let's embrace those differences, celebrate those unique strengths, and keep those communication channels open.
Because ultimately, it's through dialogue, understanding, and maybe a little bit of humor along the way that we can bridge those gaps, create a world where men and women can truly thrive together.
What a fantastic note to end on. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing. And remember, that journey to understanding each other, it's a lifelong adventure.